Okay, from here on in, this job's a lot like doing a brake job. So, what do we got to do? We got to put our caliper on with these countersunk holes here in the same position as these holes that those little countersunk screws go in to hold this rotor on. And if you had to drill them screw heads off because they broke off, or if they broke off, I wouldn't worry about it too much. The wheel's going to hold that rotor on just fine. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put on our caliper bracket. And we're also going to take this opportunity to clean up and put some grease on our slide pins. Alright, one thing I'm going to do here, just to keep this rotor from flopping around, I'm going to put not large enough to go over these lug studs. And put that on, and that'll keep this rotor from just going all over hell. So, okay, now the next thing we're going to do, I got my bolts all lubed up. I'm going to put on this caliper mounting bracket. Just like that. Alright, have a quick look up the torque specs on that. Alright, since our caliper bracket bolts should be torqued to 80 foot-pounds. Okay, there we go, 80 foot-pounds. That takes care of that. Next step, we'll get some grease on here. Grease on our other slide pin. Alright, let's put grease on all the areas that they recommend you put grease on. Greasing up our top slide pin. When I was taking apart this car, I was pretty surprised because I had a Honda Civic before, 95 in fact. And there's just a normal brake caliper, more or less, because it had two bolts that held it on. So when I was doing this car, I was wondering if the top bolt was broken off. But what this does, what some of these Honda Civics have, is it just has a bolt for the bottom that holds the caliper on. The top, this slide pin is bolted in place there, and all you do is you just slide your caliper right on over it like that. Simple as that. Pretty easy. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put on our brake pads. So I think I'm actually going to slide this off to get it out of the way, and we'll put a little bit of dabs of grease on our brake pads where they slide on the caliper mounting bracket. Okay, I just want you to take a look at this. On this car, the master cylinder is all the way full, and we're going to have to push those brake piston calipers back into their bores. And with that brake fluid that high, this will certainly overflow. So I'm going to suck some of that brake fluid out of that master cylinder reservoir. Now you can see that the level of that master cylinder is lower. What I used was my suction gun, kind of a handy thing to have. They aren't all that expensive. If you don't have one, it's not a bad thing to get. Put Probably not ideal to suck up brake fluid with this thing. It's probably hard on the seals and stuff. Brake fluid's pretty bad stuff. So when I got done sucking out my brake fluid and disposing of that, shooting that out of the gun, I just sucked up some drain oil with it in a bucket that had some drain oil several times, sucked it up, squirted it back in the bucket, and then went lower. And so I flushed it several times with some drain oil is what I'm saying. And oil certainly isn't going to hurt one of these guns and probably eliminate any damage that might be done to the brake fluid. You could use a regular old turkey baster, buy one of them if your level is too high, okay, in your master cylinder reservoir. The other thing you can do is, if you know any farmers, they typically have syringes. They do a lot of their own vet work. But you can go to a farm, if you know any farmers, you get a 10cc syringe, or if they even have bigger ones, you can suck it out with a syringe, or you can go to a vet supply place and get a syringe. They're pretty cheap, and that's a good way to lower your master cylinder fluid. And the nice thing about that, a syringe, when you're done, they just throw it away, so you don't have to worry about that brake fluid harming a halfway decent tool like a suction gun. All right, the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to put our brake pads in our caliper bracket there. And on this car, when I took it apart, the wear indicator tab was on the inside. I'm just going by that. Who knows if whoever put the brakes on this car did it wrong, but it just seems like it should be on the inside. If it's on the outside, it probably hit the wheel. A lot of times you can put these things together and things don't go together right if you don't put it together the right way. So, and I also looked at my Hayes manual. I mentioned the inside brake pad, and it showed the wear indicator on that. One other thing. Now, I've mentioned this before in other videos. They say you should put a little bit of grease where these brake pads slide on the caliper. And the thing about that is that every time I've ever done a brake job on a car, you know, obviously the brakes have been there for some time when it's time to do a brake job again, but they're totally dry. So I don't know how much good this grease does, but they say you're supposed to do it, so we'll do it. One other thing I thought I'd mention is this brake pad's got a shim on it. The old ones had a shim on it, okay? Sometimes your new pads won't have a shim on it. Were they supposed to have a shim or not? I honestly don't know. The Hayes manual said if your new brake pads do not have a shim, use your old ones. These new brake pads did have a shim on them. So we'll stick them in its designated spot here. And sometimes this is getting kind of tricky. This has got a brake hardware kit. Not a bad thing to buy. It has a little aluminum, or rather stainless steel, clips that go right where the caliper actually does the sliding, or the brake pad actually does the sliding on the caliper. And it's a pretty good idea because stainless steel is smoother than cast iron. And so I totally see the purpose of that. Once again, we'll put a little bit of grease on, brake grease on each one of these ears right here that's on these brake pads on this side, and also on the top side. We'll put just a little dab of grease on there. Like I say, I don't know if it really does any good at all. How many days do you think it takes for this grease to pretty much just evaporate and go away? But they say you're supposed to do it, so I'm going to do it. And simple as that. So now we'll plug in our brake pad on this side. And the thing is with these, sometimes this is easy and sometimes it's hard to get these brake pads to slide exactly where you want them to be. You pretty much just got to futz around with them until you get it. And sometimes they go in right away, and sometimes they're kind of a bitch. So you just gotta take your time and monkey with it. I bet mechanics that do this every single day, I bet they can just clip them in instantaneously like that. And But if you don't do it that often, you know, don't feel bad if you have some problems. Just keep futzing with it and futzing with it until you get it in. The next thing we're going to do here is we're going to push this brake caliper piston back into its bore, okay? And now here's the thing about this. You see how rusty and crappy this is? For you people that live down south, this probably isn't quite as much of an issue. Let's just see if I can get that in frame. This brake caliper piston, it gets quite rusty and cruddy, you know, because the car is running in the salt. So there is an excellent chance that after I do this brake job, this caliper is going to stick because of the rust. So it will, when you first time you apply the brakes, it'll apply. But when you let them off, it won't retract enough, and your brakes will always be engaged. And you'll wear out your brakes, maybe warp your rotors. All kinds of bad things can happen. If you really don't want, make sure you don't want to have any problem at all, you can just buy new remanufactured calipers, or new ones, I suppose, right away, and you don't even have to worry about it. What I always do is I put it together, I push her back in the bore, I'll drive the car short distances, and I'll check it, drive it short distance, check it, and if it doesn't get hot, if it isn't hot, you know, I don't apply the brakes a lot, but because they get hot if you use the brakes a lot, but I drive a short distance and I just feel the outside of the wheel. If it's hot and I haven't been using the brakes a lot, that means that caliper is stuck, and you'll have to either rebuild it or get a remanufactured one or get a new one. Okay, so now I will proceed to press that piston back into its bore. Now, I always have used a C-clamp for this, but I saw in a video where a guy just used a pair of channel lock pliers, but that's a little bit faster, so I've been doing that recently. I don't know what's better. Well, push this all the way back into its bore there like that. Got to be all the way in, or you'll never get that over those new pads. And see, when we push that back, that's going to make that fluid level in the master cylinder go up, and that is why we took some fluid out. All right, sports fans, this is one other thing I'm going to add here. Once you get your both of your brake caliper pistons squeezed back into their bore, I want you to permanently connect this in your mind. At that point, before you do anything else, put the fluid to the proper level. You might have to do that again once you pump the brakes up, but at least you got that much in there. But even more importantly, at this point, before you do anything else, put the cap back on your master cylinder. Okay? That way you won't forget it. So before you do any other steps, once you press both of those caliper pistons in, put your cap on your master cylinder, and then with drum brakes, as soon as you push the pistons in the wheel cylinder back, make sure you put your cap on your master cylinder. It's just too easy to forget a little thing like that when you're doing so many other major things. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this already or not, but this isn't my first 95 Honda Civic. My other one had two caliper mounting bolts. This one here has got a slide pin that just either bolts on or presses fit into the caliper either way, and it's only got a bolt on the bottom. Now I've already greased up all those slide pins, and now we will attempt to slip that over that pad, both pads rather, and get that in place, and that worked pretty nice. I think we're right in where we need to be. Now, this car only has a bolt on the bottom, you know, so at first I thought maybe the bolt was broke off, but that's the way it is. It's only got a bottom bolt. I looked up the torque spec on that, and if memory is correct, it was 24 pounds. So now we got to get this lined up so we can get this bolt to thread in. And there she is. And now we will attempt to Tighten that up. Now, here we go again, talking about torque. We're talking about torque here, and what we got is a situation where this is a 12 millimeter, okay? So, I do have a torque wrench that works on 3/8 drive. It's 3/8 drive torque wrench. It's the old school with the pointer beam on it. In this situation, the pointer beam would be facing away from me. I think I could actually get my head in there to check it out and see what the torque space. I think I could get away with that. Now, do I have, my other torque wrench is a 1/2-inch drive. So now we have to ask ourselves, do we have a 12 millimeter 1/2-inch drive? And we're lucky enough that we do. So that's cool. There we go. So, I am going to set my torque wrench for, I believe it's 24 pounds, and we will torque that up. Okay, 24 pounds. That's cool, ain't it? Now let's straighten out that wheel. All right, now, this is kind of stupid of me. I told you about how I put these nuts, a larger nut and then a lug nut on to keep my rotor from flopping all around. Well, this car's got these retaining screws, so I could have just used them. I wouldn't even have to mess around with that step. But I neglected to do this. And here's the other thing. This is kind of funny. This is kind of funny. I believe I lined up those holes with the threaded holes rather than the countersunk ones. Let me just, yes, it absolutely is the case. So now I have to quick take off this caliper, swing it out of the way, take off the rotor, and reposition it about 90 degrees. Now let's just pretend I didn't make that screw up, and I realized I had to put these screws in, and I realized that I have to have the countersunk holes lined up with the holes in the rotor. So, by the way, these threaded holes, what they're for is you can put probably, what is, I can't remember the size diameter, 8 by 1.25, that's just by memory, but a metric bolt goes in there and you can turn that in and that'll pop this rotor off if it doesn't want to come off easily. So, that's what those other holes are for. So we'll tighten these up, and I'm going to tell you, I ain't going to worry about torque on that, and I'm just going to get them as tight as I can get with one hand. They don't even, if you had to drill them heads off to get off this rotor, or if these screws broke off, don't worry about it. Okay, here we go again, putting our caliper bracket back on. Mounting bolts on. Try to get it lined up with the hole. There we go. Turn the bolts in. Sometimes you do that. I figure probably won't even take this screw up out because it just goes to show you we all screw up sometimes. But when you screw up, don't get that mad about it. I mean, yeah, even if somewhere costs you half an hour or what have you. It happens. It happens. And that's the only way you can learn to be more careful so you don't do it again. Okay, now we will tighten up our caliper mounting bolts. And our torque spec was some torque. It was 80 pounds, wasn't it? Well, I'll tell you what. I got my torque wrench right here. I'll put it to the proper torque. My eyesight's so bad, it's a real bear reading these torque wrenches. That's what happens when you get old. 80 foot-pounds. we go. 80 foot-pounds, everything's cool. Now we will put our caliper back on. And you know what? There's one good thing. The other thing I screwed up is I had my brake hose twisted around. So it wouldn't have been good for the brake hose, and I wouldn't have been able to put on that mounting bracket. So some amount of good came out of this. I realized that, and there we go. Look at that. We're almost back where we were. Now we'll put our bolt back in, and as I recall, that was 20 pounds. 24 pounds if your Honda has two caliper mounting bolts, and 20 pounds if it only has one. You'd think it'd almost be the other way around, wouldn't you? But that's the way it is. So let's tighten this sucker up. And we'll use our torque wrench and we'll back her down to 20 foot-pounds. There we go, 20 foot-pounds. And then this side is now done with the exception of putting in these little bracket bolts. And then all we got to do is put the wheel back.